We'll start. All right. Welcome everyone to this session. It's run by RDA's National PID Strategies Working Group. And it's great to see you all, those in the room in Seoul and those joining online. Thank you for participating in this session. I'm Daniel Bangert. I'm based at the Digital Repository of Ireland as National Open Research Coordinator, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this working group, along with Natasha Simons at the Australian Research Data Commons, Christopher Brown at JISC in the UK, and Shauna Sadler at Orchid. So just a quick recap, and Chris will take us through the aims of the working group in more detail. But what we're focused on here is policy strategy and governance around national PID strategies. So how do we come together in a national context to coordinate what happens with the agenda around persistent identifiers? We know there are many benefits, and we would like to look at how the emerging approaches to coordination have been handled in different contexts, so globally. When we talk about PID strategies, I think a caveat here is that we're interested in PID approaches. So these strategies are not necessarily fully fledged or implemented. These are multi-step processes, and they may be national or regional. But through this working group, we want to capture and learn from shared challenges and what are the common characteristics that we see. So the aim is to share and learn from emerging coordination efforts, and the deliverables that we produce are aiming to help those who are thinking about advocating for or looking to define a coordinated approach to PIDs. And the working group is relatively new. We're at our 6th month stage, so we'll be taking a look at what's happened in those 6 months and where we want to go, and inviting your contributions and participation. The agenda for today is that I'll hand shortly over to Chris to talk about the working group, and then we have a series of case studies. So we've been trying to document what's happening in different countries, and then produce a guide which looks at some of the commonalities across those different contexts. So we'll hear from 6 case studies. We'll have a Q&A session. Then Natasha will take us through the draft guide as it sits now, and we'll also be inviting progress updates from other countries and hopefully having a discussion between the participants. So I think I will leave it there, and Chris, if you want to take over.
Thanks, Daniel. I'm going to give a very quick, as it says on that agenda, update on the progress of the group. Sorry, bear with me. There we go. So yeah, I mean, as Daniel said, he's given a background to the group, so I'm going to be very quick and cover this in a very short number of slides. So I mean, we've been running 6 months, so we've got to the 6-month point now, which is why we're presenting the number of case studies and the guide. So we've got 48 members. We've been running since December. If you're not signed up, please do. We started this with a birds of a feather session at Plenary 17, where 6 case studies were presented. And then we had a follow-up meeting at the 18th Plenary, just before we were actually endorsed. We had updates from those countries, and Germany and US as well. And we reviewed the case statement, which was submitted for the working group. And that's bringing us up to this plenary, where we're reviewing the draft guide and the case studies. We've also run some meetings, co-chair meetings, and if you're a member of the group, you should see updates on the meeting schedule that we run between the plenaries. So we've run one in February, which was sort of more UTC friendly time zone, and then in May, which was a more APAC friendly time zone. And basically, what we had in the case statement was for the first 6 months to, like it says there, map the common activities across national agencies' efforts and deliver a guide on the specific PIDs adopted in the context of national PID strategies. And the outputs up till June 2022 are the draft report, version 1, if you want, of the guide. Sorry, it's called a report, but we calling it a guide, because that's really what it is, and 6 case studies which we have completed, which are currently in progress. So that's where we are, and then we have another year to run of the group. So now we're going to go through some of the case studies, which if you want to see them, the links are all in the shared document. If you go to the actual page for this session, there's a link to the shared Google Doc, and all the links to the case studies and the draft guide are in there. View only at the moment. Right. So you're going to have to bear with me because I was going to have to switch over and share Natasha's slides. So I'll hand over to Natasha, but I'm going to run the slides. So Natasha, I'll hand over to you, and I'll just do the getting the slides ready.
Thank you, Chris. So hi, everyone. I'm Natasha Simons. I'm the Associate Director for Data and Services at Australian Research Data Commons. So I'm based in Brisbane, Australia, and I'm one of the co-chairs of this group. And I'm just going to talk about our Australian emerging approach to national PIDs. So if you just go to the second page, Chris. Second slide, sorry. I just wanted to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on whose traditional lands I work and live and play, and it's the Turrbal people and the Yagara peoples of Brisbane, Australia, and pay my respect to their elders past, present and emerging. Next slide, please. Okay, so Australia has a national research infrastructure roadmap. The first one, or the previous one, was in 2016, and we just had the 2021 version released in 2022. And that roadmap, sorry, using a slightly older version of my slides, so sorry for that. The document version is available for download, but I meant to delete that part. So that infrastructure roadmap sets the priorities for the future investment by Australia's government in national research infrastructure, so building world-class research infrastructure facilities to maintain Australian excellence in research and innovation. And as a result of that roadmap, the government has announced another $900 million investment in or about 23 different national research infrastructure facilities. And the Australian Research Data Commons is one of those facilities. So if you go to the next slide, please, Chris. So to give you a quick overview of the Australian PID landscape, nationally, the national services are provided by the ARDC, my organisation, and the Australian Access Federation, who lead the Australian Orchid Consortium. So they lead the Orchid Consortium, and we lead the Data Site DOI Consortium. We also offer handles, and we have the RAID persistent identifier for research projects, which comes out of ARDC, and we issue PEARLs for grants issued by the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council, and also DOIs are also used by grants by ARDC for our investment in infrastructure as well. And of course, publications and organisations are covered by international providers, and all of those services are provided, the ARDC services are provided in partnership with international PID providers, and we provide those services free of charge to the Australian research sector. So next slide, please, Chris. Okay, so as a national PID provider, we have to choose what we invest in, and that is based on the national adoption and coverage, the efficient national provision, like where do we add value as ARDC. We also look at it based on strategic national direction, so where are we heading, and the roadmap gives us some of the pointers there. We look at international trends and community adoption, because it's no use just using a PID because it looks good. It has to be one that's used and wanted by the community here as well. And the value for research, especially data in discovery, efficiency, accuracy, citation linking and impact tracking as well. And for those interested, there's a link there to our PIDS policy, which is about supporting fair research, the findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable research. Next slide, please, Chris. Our current focus is that we have partnered with the Australian Access Federation, who I mentioned run the Australian Orchid Consortium, to fund an Australian a PID cost-benefit analysis. So this is very similar to the one that was conducted in the UK by More Brains Cooperative. So we have also contracted More Brains Cooperative. And the idea behind that is we'd like to see the value of our investment in PIDs in a documented form to help us look at which are our priority PIDs and to help us feed into a national PID strategy where we can consolidate our PID investment and maximize our investment by having a national approach across the sector. So I would say that we have a national approach sort of by, not so much by default, but between ARDC and AAF, we have a national approach, but we don't have a formally agreed upon national PID strategy. And we hope that we will move in that direction as we go along the journey with the cost benefit analysis. And we certainly have good groundwork there in the establishment of the Australian Orchid Consortium, which is something that the ARDC was involved in its previous form, and the Australian National Data Service is one of the organisations critical in getting that up and running. And we really have a very good national approach to Orchid, where almost all of our universities are in the consortium, as well as our major funders and other research providers as well. Next slide, please, Chris. I think that's it. So it's just the 5-minute highlights from me. Thank you. We can hand to next presenter.
Thank you, Natasha. And sorry about that slide. Right. Sorry. Let me just get this running. Oops. Sorry about this, just technology glitch. Right, doesn't help that I close the slides. Apologies for that. Right, so it's taken about half a minute out of my presentation. But anyway, hopefully you can see that. I'm going to give a quick overview of the UK case study. This was presented at previous plenary, so if there's a lot of detail in those previous plenary notes and the presentation, so I'm just going to give a bit of background and sort of key features, I suppose, if you like, of the UK strategy or approach. So things that actually initiated this was sort of having the right leadership. Having a national strategy requires that strategic leadership and a vision from major funders and key stakeholders. So if you check back on previous presentations, you'll see links to the Tickell report, which recommended the use, and in some cases mandating the use of PIDs, and that sort of kick-started a project which is called the UK PIDs for Open Access project, and which is funded by Research England, part of UKRI, and that gave this funding to do this PID roadmap and the strategy. So one of the drivers behind this is the benefits and efficiencies that it would bring to the whole research life cycle through adoption and integration of priority PIDs. So that's sort of key. The adoption and integration of these persistent identifiers would bring benefits and efficiencies to the whole, I suppose, research ecosystem is quite a nice way of putting it, other than just the life cycle. And also sometimes it requires policy to mandate the use of these PIDs rather than just sort of incentives. So the sort of carrot and stick approach. So with the policy is more of a stick. We've got the UKRI open access policy, calling for extensive use of PIDs. So as part of this project, it set up a governance group, which was the Research Identifier National Coordinating Committee, the RINC, unfortunately named, but we've stuck with it. So that provides guidance, can oversee the work in this place. This is made up of a number of stakeholders from funders to national societies to publishers, institutions, all sorts of people. And there have been 2 meetings of the ring so far, and there'll be a third in October, which I'll mention in a minute. Part of it also is showing the impact, and as Natasha's kindly pointed out already, the cost-benefit analysis work that was done by More Brains, showing that rather than just saying that persistent identifiers are good, we can actually prove it with some sort of showing the cost savings and the value of implementing and integrating persistent identifiers. In the UK, we came up with priority PIDs, 5 of them, on grants, outputs, people, organisations and projects. There are obviously other persistent identifiers, but these were seen as the priority ones that we should focus on initially during this strategic roadmap approach. So part of this work also requires a business case. I've got a link on the next slide, so we can actually ensure there's an investment in the strategy, because it does actually require investment. And also, to help with some of this adoption and integration, you need a support consortium that can lower the barriers to and the cost of PID adoption. So a lot of this work has been running for a few years and in a number of phases, and basically what we called PID phase 2, which is all part of the UK PIDs for Open Access project. Like I said, there's a lot more detail in my previous presentations and links available. So there is a case. We have More Brains actually published this on Zenodo for the case for investment in a UK persistent identifier strategy, showing how these persistent identifiers are used in 4 different areas: funding, content, research data management, institutional research management. I would have liked those to be published before this plenary. Unfortunately, they're not. Those are coming soon. I think those are going to be a useful resource, not just for the UK, but internationally. And the phase we're in at the moment, which we're calling phase 3, is putting together a business plan and a roadmap to justify the setting up of a support consortium. And the other part of that phase is also looking at a research activity identifier RAID, as Natasha's already mentioned, doing the business planning and a roadmap for setting up a UK RAID registration agency, and looking at Pathfinder projects, finding use cases and user stories of the use of RAID. And as I mentioned just before, once these outputs are delivered at the end of September, I'll be running the 3rd RINC meeting to present these outputs to this governance group. So that's pretty much a whistle-stop tour of where we are with the UK. I'll hand over to, is it Mark now? I'll just check I have to check the agenda. Who was next?
Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Great, thanks. And I'm not going to use a slide deck, but I think somebody put the link in earlier, and then I think Daniel, I'm not sure if the link Daniel just put in is to the overarching document or to the UK document. So
that's the shared notes, that document.
Okay, yeah. So in the agenda for today in the shared notes, there's a link to the Canada case study template. So I'm just going to do a brief recap of that and refer to that document. As you just heard from Natasha and Chris, there's a not exactly the same, but a common approach in Canada. We actually have a national PID strategy committee. It's called the Canadian PID Advisory Committee, or CPIDAC as we call it. If we didn't have all these great sounding acronyms, where would we be? So CPIDAC has worked with my organization, the Digital Research Alliance of Canada, and the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, or CRKN, to move the national conversation forward. And as with our 2 preceding presentations, Canada has engaged More Brains as a consultant to develop an initial roadmap. So as that roadmap process is done. More Brains produced an initial document for the Canadian context. We haven't made that public yet, but we will be shortly. Couple of comments from that. When you look at, for example, the priority PIDs from the presentation Chris just gave, the various working groups and consultations that More Brains did arrived at a similar prioritization of PIDs, pretty much the same. So I don't think that would be too much of a surprise. The funding for that, and also a portion of funding for our national Orchid and data site consortia. So Canada has both national Orchid and data site organizations. So the Alliance has provided funding for those two organizations as well. And moving forward in our current fiscal year, in Canada, it's not uncommon for organizations to have a fiscal year starting April 1. So we do have additional funding in the current fiscal year to continue the conversation and kind of go to the next stage with the National PID strategy in Canada. As I said, no real surprise. I was actually one of the individuals that kind of participated from afar, if you will, in the RAID ISO process. So I'm quite keen, as are a number of colleagues in Canada, to see a RAID implementation broadly in the Canadian landscape. So that'll certainly, I hope, follow Orchid and DOIs as key PIDs in Canada. So I think you can see the details in there. We've also included a link to some of the recent integrations, like the Orchid OGS integration. That saw some work internationally as well as here in Canada. So some additional documents provided in our case study. The Alliance, as it was forming, because the Alliance is a new organization, we're actually just in the process of submitting a proposal to our national government for our approach for the next 2 fiscal years going up to 2025, which will hopefully include additional funding and support for PIDs in the national context. And a couple of the white papers that were submitted by the research community in Canada regarding PIDs are linked to there. And there's also some links to the CPDAC, the National Committee, both the membership and the terms of reference. And you can see from that, it's a very broad membership with funders and research organizations and infrastructure providers. So it's a nice kind of foundation for moving us forward nationally with all of the different actors. And there you can also see there's a link to a presentation where More Brains, the last link in our use case, is a link to the More Brains presentation, which was given a couple of months ago. So I think that's probably it for me, Chris. Lots of interest in what the approaches are. In Canada, we've also got a small group of individuals, including myself, that are interested in how kind of emerging, if you will, PID infrastructures like DIDs or distributed IDs, how they can potentially inform or impact on our own kind of emerging PID infrastructures globally. So hopefully we'll see more work with that kind of the DIDs from the W3 Consortium and other kinds of emerging approaches. So that's it for me, Chris.
Thank you, Mark. I'll hand over to Gordon. We do have 10 minutes for questions on the case studies after the last one, but over to you, Gordon.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm presenting the Netherlands as a case. Just as Mark, I don't have any slides prepared, and I'm keeping it very, well, as short as possible. So you can read in the link in the link to the case study how we've approached things. So we don't have a PID strategy yet in the Netherlands, but we are first in the phase where we try to align all the interests and try to see what the use cases are for the different persistent identifiers that are there to use. We are not approaching things from the PID perspective, but more from the use case perspective, and then seeing how a certain identifier can add a value. So we just published this year a document called Towards a National PID Strategy, or a PID roadmap, where we first identified a couple of use cases and described 2 of them. The first one is about reporting and registering research output from an institute perspective. And the second is about the findability of research output for reproducibility purposes. So we had an open consultation for this document to see and give an opportunity for other stakeholders who were not involved in the advisory board or the working group. So far, we have received positive comments on our approach. And we've just decided to continue our work and improve the use cases we have based on the feedback we received, to be more specific on the actions to follow up, well, the actions linked to the recommendations we described. And the third one is that we are now also in the phase of building a broader community in the Netherlands for PID fans, so they can also be more involved and informed about how we're approaching things. So that's very short about how we do things in the Netherlands and how far we are at the moment.
Thank you very much, Gul. I'm going to move quickly on to Jessica's, and hopefully you can see her slides. Loaded a bit quicker than mine. But over to you, Jessica.
That was good. Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, good. Sorry, I dropped out for a minute, so I was sure everything's working still. Okay, so just please next slide. I have only 2 slides. I won't be repeating the things that I've written in the case study. We're still writing a PID roadmap. I would maybe, as a general observation, as we have a national research data hub or research information hub, actually, we already have a quite long list of PIDs implemented, and what I think is maybe special for the Finnish approach now has been that we are very much trying to align with the national general government, as we have a national interoperability platform that we also use from the research sector. So we're trying to be aligned with the public sector open data and data management, like interoperability work, and also like having these discussions with ministries and other government bodies in part. So as we see as generally all public data as potential research data, so we hope to be able to bring sort of our knowledge to this discussion. The writing of the PID roadmap itself has been a bit slow, I think, and difficult. We are writing it in a national, like sort of unofficial network. But as the government is also like interested in taking part in this work, we see that it has a certain interest and maybe perhaps even mandate and influence, but it's a bit vague still. So but maybe if we jump to the second slide, I would just like to mention some things happening in the EOSC, where we have actually 2 projects starting now, Fair Impact and Fair Core for EOSC, which will be very much working with PIDs, implementing PID policies and architecture and developing the like structures around these. And I actually have I think we're waiting for the Data Act to be implemented, also to be ready and then implemented in Finland. So that's another thing that we are hoping for, that there will be some guidance regarding the persistent identifiers and identifiers in general, which we both hope to feed in our knowledge in the Finnish system, but also then have some support there. And then I also wanted to mention that we are also at CSC, we've started the describing the enterprise architecture for persistent identifiers, and from this we took we started with the EOSC PID policy, and now we also looked at the actual practical like landscape in Finland, and also now looking at the EOSC PID architecture, and I hope this work can be useful, and we can bring it and present it and discuss it. There are some maybe not conflicts, but unclarities in the relation between the PID policy and the PID architecture on the EOSC level. So these are like, it feels it would be really good to discuss like all these like basic concepts and roles and actors and stakeholders and business models and services together. So I hope we can maybe at some point from CSC bring some input to this kind of discussion. So thank you.
Thanks, Jessica. It's over to Jehoine, who's in the room.
Yes, our next presenter is Jehoine Kim, who's from KISTI and in the room today. So if we can share his presentation, please.
Nice to meet you. My name is Jehoine Kim from KISTI. I'm from South Korea. I'm a member of PID Strategy Working Group, but I'm quite new, so I'm not deeply involved yet. So I would like to show the landscape of PID in South Korea today, and I summarized 2 pages. And to join the working group, and in my last presentation on May last month, I thought that after my presentation, I thought that it is need to be introduced whole landscape of South Korea, I think. So I added a new slide to my presentation, and it is not whole landscape of PID in South Korea, just related to scientific information and research data. And I think there would be major 5 institutions in Korea. My institution is KISTI in the center, but I will introduce from the left side. First institution is National Library. National Library is an institution control bibliographic data for national publications. So National Library manages traditionally ISBN and ISSN RA for national publication. And recently, the National Library is one of ISNI RA in Korea, and National Library manages author identification by ISNI for national publication. And secondly, I would say I would mention National Assembly Library. National Assembly Library's objective is to support legislation. For example, members of National Assembly. They broadly collect data in South Korea for legislation. So they collect even thesis data, and they need to identify researchers of thesis. So National Assembly Library is one of ISNI RA in Korea. And thirdly, WKIST is a government-funded research institution specialized in science and technology information field. And KIST is one of 11th DOI RA around the world, and we focused on DOI RA for Korean intellectual property research outputs, and we do manage information service to her researchers in Korea and citizens. Our target content are research paper and research report and patent and research data. From 2016, we have expanded types of content registering DOIs by cooperation with scholarly communities and public institutions. And so far, we developed, we heard from our users many needs to improve our DOI system. So we developed so far, and now we are stage of application stage of a DOI system. So this year we're trying to gather citation data from research papers around the world. And KIST is also doing service for researchers and citizens. We have two services, major services. First is Science Zone, and the second is the priority is not important now. In Science Zone and NTIs, we are managing two major services. Science Zone's content are domestic research paper and domestic R&D report and domestic patent and overseas research paper. And NTIs is a database and service of government-funded research outputs. The people identification and institution identification is managed quite well because it is mandated to researchers who get funded. Researchers are mandated to register their own ID verified by Korean social security numbers. So government-funded research outputs and funding information and researchers' IDs are connected, interlinked and connected and controlled very well. And fourthly, there is KISTEP, which is government-funded government R&D planning and evaluation agency. It manages NRI, National Researcher Identifier. NRI is adapted to when researchers get funded. NRI is recorded to their government research outputs. And lastly, it is not close to in this area, but I would mention it. KCC, a government agency of Copyright Commission. It covers various types of content, digital content. So there is some redundancy of various identifiers. Okay. Oh, sorry. And KIST and National Library and National Assembly Library and KISTEP are cooperating with managing persistent identifiers. And this is case study of KIST. KIST's objective in the view of PID management, KIST's objective is to curate scientific information of higher state of identification. And we are trying to, for better curation and interlinking and tracking research impact and analyzing research outcomes. We manage PIDs. I can say two types of functions, I would say. First is Korean research and R&D outputs management. It is related PIDs are DOI and Korean Research ID and Korean Research Funding ID. And the other is Identifier database development. It is ongoing our project to improve our identification works. So we are managing DOI as a DOI RA, and we gather many PIDs from various PID RAs. We collect ISNI, Orchid, and Korean Research ID, and etc. And you see ROR in this slide, but we are not yet gathered ROR data, and this is this year's first trying project. And roadmap, I would say, from you see the triangle, and from the bottom of the triangle, I would explain. First is DOI RA management. KIST supports identification and increasing visibilities of Korean R&D outputs and intellectual properties. And KIST collaborates with DOI RAs around the world and global identification systems, for example, Orchid. And second phase is Korean researcher organization identification. We collect researcher and their organization identification appeared in Korean research papers and patents, reports, etc. And we do identify people and their organization by a rule-based process, and we hybridly we are doing identifying by automated by machine learning technology. And on top of comprehensive SNT information linking is quite challenging, and we are planning to start from this year. We will consolidate identifier data in domestic papers. It contains content, author, organization, thesaurus, and citations. It is very experimental project of starting this year, and our objective is to improve identification rate and becoming an identifier hub in KIST, because we have many databases, domestic papers, patents, and reports. Those databases are built separately. So there are in each database there are various and different and non-matching identifiers are separately exist. So this year we plan to gather PID-centric data from separated databases. Yeah. Okay. That's the current status of KIST, and I showed a landscape of PIDs in South Korea. Thank you.
Thanks, Jehoine. We do have a couple of questions in the chat. Daniel, do you want me to read them out, or you want to read them out?
Yeah, if you could, maybe we'd take the one for Jehoine.
Yeah, so question for Jehoine says, this is from Natasha. I mean, Natasha, feel free to ask this yourself, but if you've got a low bandwidth, I'll just go ahead and let you butt in to ask yourself. So for Natasha, we are thinking about patents. You've unmuted, Natasha. Do you want to ask it?
Sure. So thanks, Jay, for the talk, and it was fantastic. And we're thinking about patents in Australia and how we can pull patents into our National Research Data Discovery Portal. So I was wondering, do you have a patent office in Korea, and how is it that you came to use DOIs for the patents?
We are collaborating with Korea Patent Office. So Korea Patent Office is one of registering institution of DOI by us. Yeah, and so each patent has a DOI identifier, and even they issuing QR codes. So patent users can easily access to and verify their patents systematically.
Okay, that is a good precedent for us. Thank you.
Thank you.
We've got a question from Elise Harder to Natasha and Mark. Is the membership in National Orchid DOI Consortia covered fully by your governments? If so, is that due to the National PID strategies? I see, Natasha, you've answered that in the chat. But don't know if you want to add anything or for the recording, and Mark?
Well, I might just say it in case you can't see the chat in the room there. So the answer is that the Australian Orchid Consortium requires a membership fee, and it's led by the Australian Access Federation, which is a not-for-profit organisation. They are the Orchid Consortium lead in Australia, so that requires a fee. The Australian Data Site DOI Consortium is led by my organisation, the Australian Research Data Commons, and we do offer the DOIs free to the Australian research sector, and we pay the fees to DataSite. And this is not the result of having a formal national PID strategy, which we don't yet have, but it's more the result of being funded by the Australian federal government, and that government having invested significantly in building research infrastructure, of which PIDS is, part of the backbone of very world-class infrastructure. So thank you for the question. Yeah, I'm not sure if Mark wants to answer.
Yeah, just quickly, the Alliance, as I mentioned earlier, is a national organization, and the funds that we've provided go towards offsetting, if you will, the member fees for the Orchid and DataSite consortia. I'm jealous of the Australian context because we don't yet have the ability to cover all of the fees for, say, Orchid or DataSite, including the minting. So the funding that we provide goes towards offsetting those costs, as well as offsetting the costs of central staff at CRKN, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, as well as the staff that are at the Alliance that help facilitate these activities. So So in answer to your question, it doesn't, that national funding isn't because of an existing national PID strategy, because we're still developing that, but I suppose it's in recognition of the importance of PIDs in the research landscape. So the Alliance has worked with the institutions in Canada to facilitate a more cohesive and robust support network for PIDs.
Thanks, Tash and Mark. So do you want to add something there, Tash?
Yeah, there was a follow-up question about the, comment from Jessica about the upper limit for DOIs per organisation. So that is true. So in line with DataCite, membership changes, when was it? A couple of years ago. We encourage organisations who mint 10,000 DOIs per annum or more to join DataCite directly, but we encourage them to do it. They don't have to do that. We also started an Australasian, so it's Australia, New Zealand DataCite DOI community of practice as well, to just try and, which we do in partnership with DataCite, to encourage more direct contact between the members and DataCite, which is in line with what DataCite would like in their membership model. So even though people are part of a consortium, they hear directly from DataCite as well.
There's a general question from Jonathan Schaefer about, can a national strategy for minting DOI be built with EPIC instead of DataCite? If yes, does anybody do it? Does anyone have an answer to that?
No, but I could comment. Maybe if this is also a member of EPIC. I think we need to have several like recommended PIDs. I see that if there might be some challenges with the interoperability of the metadata. If it depends on sort of the types of objects we assign EPIC DOIs, and I think there's quite relevant and interesting discussion going on about the data types and like object types also, and the kernel like attributes, and how different PIDs should actually be machine readable and actionable and structured. So how we actually would need to categorize the different PID types. I think there will be room and a need for EPIC also, the EPIC DOIs, perhaps for some entities, some kind of objects. But I feel that we don't have like enough agreement on how to achieve real interoperability there. But I think it's a relevant question, because I think if we had some use cases for the EPIC DOI for some type of object or some use cases, that would be helpful to maybe share and discuss.
I was going to read Carlo's question. Mark, you've sort of given an answer there, haven't you? So it was about the scope of the group. Carlo Marie as well saying, question about international strategies. Consider an international research team producing some data, where the data will be stored only in one national data center, on different ones. In this last case, what will be the PID strategy? We have different PID for the same underlying data. Way to link these two PIDs to tell these are actually pointing to the same product. And like I say, is that question for the group. Mark, you've answered that with an issue in the research ecosystem, regardless of national PID strategies. I think a bit like RAID has an opportunity to facilitate the kind of approach you allude to by providing a single PID record for all outputs associated with a research project, which could also include PIDs to outputs stored in different repositories. I don't know if anyone wants to add to that, but we are overrunning a bit. So if not, I'll move on, because we've got some general discussion questions here about strategies. So I think probably should move on and then maybe pick some of these up at the end.
I think that's a good idea, because the question from Petra is in regard to the national strategy across all of them, perhaps. So maybe I can just talk about where the guide is at, and then we can go into that question.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'll share your slides.
Thank you.
Over to you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So part of this, so we have a working group and not an interest group. So we are doing some work, and we are developing a draft guide for National PID strategies, which is actually quite a challenging thing to do in the timeframe that we have, and given some of the challenges. So I will just talk through where we are at with the guide, and then we'll go to questions. So Chris, next slide, please. Okay. The intention of this guide, though, is that it can be adopted or adapted by other countries who are looking to develop their own PID strategies. And the approach that we've taken is to gather some case studies and to try and compare these. Next slide, Chris. Okay, so the case studies that we have collected so far are from these 6 countries that we have heard from today. Since we've put this slide deck together, we've had a couple more come in. However, I haven't included them here because they came in too late to be included, but they will be included in the next round of developing this guide. So what I've done here is to compare some of the case studies collected and just basically looked at a bit of an analysis of that. So next slide, Chris. Okay, so our key findings so far are, first of all, national PID strategies are in the very early stages. There's hardly anyone who can say we have a formal national PID strategy that is agreed on by everybody and endorsed by government or whoever it is. Virtually nobody can say that. It's very early stages. So most countries have an emerging initiative or an approach to PIDs. And also the environment is changing. So these strategies are developing as we speak. So there are some implications of that for the working group. We've had to adjust our scope to include national or regional PID approaches or initiatives, as well as national strategies. So some people said we can't fill out a case study because we don't have a national strategy, but yet they did have an approach, and we want to capture that. We want to capture the national PID environment in different countries and look at where it is heading. So there may be more than one case study for some countries, potentially from 2 different organisations who might be providing national PID services. The case studies will be a snapshot in time, and therefore the guide will be a snapshot in time. So perhaps, 12 months down the track, it will look very different in different places than what it does now. Next slide, please, Chris. So the first question we asked in the case study is, what is the scope of your strategy? And this varied, but generally, the elements that were in common for the scope were research and government data, basically. So anything related to research and government data. Next slide, Chris. We asked about the drivers, which are essentially the motivations for a national PID approach, a PID initiative, a PID strategy. And here are some of the common drivers. So they do differ, but the common ones were better national coordination, consolidation, and alignment of the investment that is made in PIDs. There are a lot of different PIDs to choose from, and having national coordination and help to consolidate that investment and make the most of it. Also, lower cost and barriers to PID adoption and reduce the administrative burden. Also to enable research to be more fair and more open, to improve linking and discovery of research outputs and entities being researchers, etc. And to have better research reporting, including for national research assessment exercises, such as the UK's REF reporting. And also better tracking of research outcomes and impact. Research impact is quite important to people. and to support best practice. Next slide, Chris. So there were also some unique to particular country drivers, and here they are listed: to develop digital research infrastructure of the future. I thought that was a wonderful vision from Canada. Reproducibility, also very important from Finland and the Netherlands. To build national services to support interoperability. So Finland mentioned that. Better curation of research outputs and correct author attribution in Korea, and responsible management of research information in the Netherlands. Okay, next slide, please. So in terms of strategy development, most countries, as I said, are in the early phases of developing a national PID strategy, but they aren't starting from scratch. And in most cases, they are evolving from pre-existing work that has been done in the country around PIDs and through the research infrastructure governance groups. And examples there are Finland's PID Forum Network or the Netherlands PID Advisory Group. And they also build on Orchid and DOI consortiums. Roadmaps are also a common feature of national PID strategies because they enable enable an identification of key stakeholders and provide that high-level action plan for how to get from A to B. Next slide, please, Chris. So some of the key features of the national PID strategies. One was having a coordinating group. So you need some group to drive the national PID strategy. And generally that seems to be an open network, a collection of collaborators from different organizations who are either offering PIDs or offering research infrastructure and who are interested in this. So that's a very important step in coordinating the national PID strategy, and some examples are on the right there: the PID Advisory Board in the Netherlands, JISC and collaborators in the UK, the Canadian PID Advisory Group and PID Forum Finland. So a working group is another common feature because it's not just the coordination, but then there's some work that is required, and having a spin-off working group that provides a forum for advancing the practical aspects of the national strategy is also needed. And an example there is the UK Research Identifier National Coordinating Committee. Another common feature is analysis. So to develop the PID strategy, some countries feel that they need the evidence to be able to do that. So there's a landscape analysis in Canada and the UK. There's a PID cost benefit analysis that's being done in the UK, and that is being done in Australia. Next slide, please, Chris. Also funding. So we need one or more organisations who provide funding to conduct the analysis report or to run workshops that will help advance the PID strategy. And there are some examples on the right there, KISTI being one of those. Stakeholders is another important common feature, and basically they were, PID service providers, PID consortiums, research infrastructure and service providers, universities, organisations, groups and networks that advance fair and open research, research funders, researchers, research stewards, publishers, government. So these are not, I think everybody in this room would be familiar with those stakeholders, and the PID strategy, because it's a very common element, gets all those stakeholders in the room. Next slide, please, Chris. Also, having an open and consultative process is another common feature. Having a single organisation that has, or a collaboration between organisations that's issued a PID policy of national scope is also important, and having that roadmap to take the PID vision from A to B. Next slide, please. Okay, also key, in terms of key infrastructure, this really varied between case studies, but the common elements were three of them. One, having a national research publication or discovery portal, or in some cases more than one. Having repository or repositories who provide the research records, and international PID providers such as Orchid, DataSite, and so forth. Next slide, please, Chris. And in terms of the PIDs collected, so this is sort of really looking at those first 6 case studies. It's kind of divided into researchers or just people contributing to research and using Orchids and ISNIs for those. Research organizations, hello? Hang on.
Hi, Natasha. We can still see you.
Am I back?
Yes, you're there.
Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
Can you
we
hear
can
us?
hear you.
Can you hear me, Chris?
I can hear you. Can you hear me? I don't think you can hear me, Tash. You can hear me. No? Oh, I think we've got a technical problem.
Can you hear me, Chris?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I just dipped out for a minute. Okay, so here is the list. You've probably had a chance to read them now of the PIDs that are provided, the common PIDs between the case studies. There's a long tail of really different PIDs, but these were sort of what it looked like to be the top ones. Next slide, please, Chris. In terms of impact and monitoring, we asked, do you have an impact and monitoring strategy in place for the National PID strategy? And in most cases, this hasn't yet been defined. KISTI's curation activities are reported and monitored to the Korean Ministry of Science and Technology, and the UK has done some work in this area as well. Next slide, please. So the next steps for the guide are to complete the draft and to share that for comment from other working group members based on these 6 case studies. So this is a very rough cut of what it will look like. To collect more case studies and draft a next version of the guide, and then share that updated version for comment from working group members in December. So I think that's it from me. And if you would like to be involved, you could join the working group. You can comment on the draft guide. We would really love more case studies, so you could provide one or put us in touch with someone who can provide a case study, and also tell others who you think might be interested in the working group and our guide as well. So I hope that's given you an idea of some of the very high level comparisons features between the National PID strategies or PID initiatives. And I'll just hand back to Chris for questions.
Thanks, Natasha. Brilliant. We're supposed 5 minutes for any updates from any countries, and then we're going into discussion and questions. So if anyone wants to give a very short update from their country or volunteer for writing a case study, put your hand up. Okay, if not, because we've got a quarter of an hour left, well, just over, I've got 18 minutes on my watch. I think we'll go into the discussion. But if anyone wants to give an update in writing, please put it into the shared doc. So, Daniel, I think you were going to moderate this, but also we did have a Menti poll. I don't know if we want to get that running while we're doing the discussion. I can put in the link to the chat.
Yeah, we might take the questions first, Chris, and then see how much time there is. But I think there was one question from Petra we didn't get to. Maybe if you'd like to repeat that question or ask it over the Zoom, that would help the people in the room also understand the question.
Okay, I can do that because I can't see Petra listed anymore. Okay, I'll just read it out. In the case of national strategy, how did you make it legitimate? Have the government approved it? I know from the UK, we came sort of from that TICL recommendation or report, so that was sort of government funded, so, and through UKRI, which is the largest funder, so yes, there are other countries.
Would any of the other presenters like to come in on that question?
Well, in the Netherlands, the government is not included. And I think, as far as I see it at the moment, this is when we have all the stakeholders involved in the process, and then they are able to, that they can see themselves in the action plans and stuff, then that's also fine, and we'll get an uptake from the stakeholders and the ones who need to do some changes and stuff. So the government, I mean, of course, it could help in the process when the government is providing support or being the one who's requesting for those changes. But yeah, it seems to work also without the government being involved.
Thanks, Gul. Are there any other answers or comments? Well, Petra, if you'd like to unmute as well, you can ask a follow-up.
Thank you for answering the question. Really appreciate it, because in the Czech Republic, we are preparing a project that should provide the national approach to persistent identifiers. So I was wondering how to make it real national strategy accepted by all levels and all stakeholders. So thank you for the use cases. That's
great. That sounds very interesting, actually. Would you like to share anything else with the group about that project?
Okay, it's supposed to start the following year, and it's going to be till 2028, and we hope we will be able to fund the persistent identifiers from the project. And we created the National Center for Persistent Identifiers within the National Library of Technology in Prague. So we are at the beginning, and so far we start with the Orchid Consortium. So there's a lot of in front of us, and this is something really useful and helpful to see that somebody is already ahead and we don't have to find everything ourselves.
That's great to hear. Thanks, Petra. Were there any further questions in the chat or in the room as well? Just feel free to raise your hand, or you can come up.
Melroy's got their hand up. Daniel, Melroy, do you want to?
Go ahead, Melroy.
Thanks for that, Daniel. Hello, everyone. This is Melroy here from Australia. Just in answer to Petra's question, what we've been doing in Australia, at least as Natasha mentioned, with regards to the Orchid Consortium, the easiest way to get buy-in from the government, or at least get the government interested, is in looking at trying to get your national funders using persistent identifiers or getting them into these consortiums. So as part of the Australian Orchid Consortium, we've got the Australian Research Council and the National Health and Medical Research Council, two of our biggest national funders, as consortium members. And both of them have integrated Orchid within their research management systems and have acknowledged the importance not only of Orchids, but also of DOIs. And in the latest Excellence Excellence in Research Australia review report, one of the things the report highlighted was more use of persistent identifiers like Orchids and DOIs in upcoming research exercises. So it's a slow start, but once there is a lot more buy-in from national funders and gradually they see the benefits, and the benefits then flow on to researchers and organizations, automatically the hope is that the governments will get into it and we'll look at using it at least to form some part of their policy with regards to research work. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes.
Thanks, Melroy. I think Gul wanted to add something.
Jessica was first.
Oh, someone else was there?
Me perhaps, but I don't know if you wanted to give a comment on this question. I just found another question from the chat which about from Carla Maria 12 on how whether we are addressing the storage actually and the persistence and management of the digital objects themselves, and if this is within the scope of this work. But so I don't know if we want to discuss that or comment on that, but maybe we can take that later.
Yeah, we might go over to Gul if it was on the was it a follow-up to the strategy discussion?
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on Melroy by mentioning that indeed, even in the Netherlands, in the advisory board, we have the national funder, taking place in this advisory board. So it's also very important to make sure that you have the parties involved that can, pave the way and put the topic on the agenda, on a strategic agenda where necessary, to make sure that everyone, is not involved, but just to make sure that everyone knows that this work is being done and people are supporting it. So that was just a comment I wanted to make as well.
Yeah, thank you, Gul. And I think in the guidance where we're looking at commonalities, this is also very strong. So how you bring the stakeholders together, and then also how you organize the coordinating bodies, so you have everyone around the table. I just wonder if Mark wanted to add anything. I know it's very early in the morning there, so just give him the opportunity to speak if he wishes.
It is very early. I think I can see the sky is starting to brighten. I don't really have anything to add, but thanks for that opportunity.
No worries. Okay, let's just check the chat. Yes, there was a question about the next working group meetings. Chris, do you want to say that? It's helpful for those in the room as well.
I mean, the plan is to have them every 2 months, including the plenary meetings. So in 2 months, but I mean, that would be August. So it's probably unlikely we'd run it in August. So more than likely to run in September. We did originally plan to have a sort of 2 different time zones at the same time, but then we thought it was probably a bit of an overkill. So that's why we've ran the European US friendly time zone one, which will probably be in September, though we haven't got firm dates. And then 2 months later, November probably, or maybe in December. The APAC friendly time zone, I mean, that will coincide nicely with the dates that Natasha had about, with the graph, the draft guide, the sort of less draft version of the guide, sort of more comprehensive version. So, but yeah, we do need to firm up those dates, but we will share that on the mailing list. So if you haven't joined the group, please join the group. And also a call for people to get as involved as much as possible. I mean, you're welcome to just follow the mailing list, but we'd like people to get more involved, contribute to the guide, leave comments. Even if you want to write sections on it, we're more than welcome to. We're never going to turn anyone down, let's put it that way. So we're welcome to have as much help and assistance as possible, get more people involved, and also get as many case studies as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Just like to echo that. These are volunteer groups, obviously, so they're really driven by the interests and efforts of their members. So please do reach out. If what you've heard today is of interest, please join the group. You'll be able to get updates and then participate as much as you would like to. Is there maybe a question or two? Just, we have a few minutes. We could take one or two. Are there any comments in the room as well? If not, via Zoom.
Should I get the Menti poll up just in, because we do have like 7 minutes left, so I think we do have time to just put it there and give people a chance. I don't think we've got much time to analyse the results, but at least we get some input.
Yeah, let's do that as the final thing then.
Okay, I'll put the link there.
Yeah, there's a short Menti, which Jessica has also prepared in the background, so thank you, Jessica. Would you like to share screen, Chris? Maybe we'll go with you all.
Yeah, I need it to proceed. That just gives me the front page. Jessica, you're doing it brilliant. Thank you.
So there's a code written at the top. You can use that number if you go to menti.com and put in that number. We'll just be taking a poll. So it's just a series of questions. So we've got a few people hitting that heart button, which I think means they're into the poll. And Jessica, is it you who has to advance the poll itself? Okay, great. So from which country are you? Well, I think we know at least those who presented where they're from. But we have about 20, 21, 22 participants via Zoom, and there's about 15 in the room. Excellent. Yes, we do have participants from South Korea, Australia, Germany, Austria, India, UK, Japan, the Netherlands, Czech, and Canada, and France. Excellent. Maybe we can move on. So what kind of PID landscape do you have in your country? Is it several but separate activities? Is there something nationally coordinated and with a policy in place? Is it maybe just the PID policy, or just national coordination? Or maybe there's, at the moment at least, very little activity. Right, so there is, at least in this group, national coordination happening, and or national coordination and policy. We have some several but separate activities.
I want to know which countries have very little activity. But we see we're running out of time, so I think we're not going to get to all these questions, are we?
I guess we'll have to move on, yeah. How can we best help efficient management and utilization of PIDs? So I guess this is a brainstorm. So I think this is more about the uptake, right? How do we get PIDs adopted? What works best? So we have a few answers. We can leverage existing efforts and don't try to reinvent the wheel. We can ensure fair principles are being met, especially interoperability. We need more information and metadata curation. Look at which systems are stable and ready to be relied on. We can align with international developments. We need collaboration of different stakeholders. Ensure the PIDs themselves are all connected. Help support guidance, national strategy. Facilitate more effective integrations. Highlight the benefits of visible and shareable metadata. We can fund usage, methodological support, and the curation of metadata. And national coordination, national infrastructure that leverages our global PID infrastructure and agreed priorities. Improve the role of community in managing and utilizing PIDs. Implement and adopt RAID as a key missing piece. Good to hear. And use the global PID infrastructure.
I think
That's
we might have
great.
to stop it there, Daniel, because we're
Yeah.
hitting 9:30 now, aren't we?
We're just
Thank you,
coming up.
Jessica. Sorry, 9:30 UK time, sorry. 8:30
Yes.
UTC.
Yeah, so it's 5:30 here in Seoul. So I think we will wrap the session there. There is the collaborative notes document, so if you have any further thoughts or questions, please add them in there. Also add your name and email. Again, join the working group. We need your contributions. And thanks again to all the speakers and participants for joining this session. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the conference.
Cheers.